Jack, you referenced again in your podcast with Lex Fridman about meeting someone from the KGB who ultimately said to you, "So, are you in?"
Yeah.
And this was in relation to joining, and he said that they liked decisive people.
Yeah.
And I wonder, so lawyers often have to make decisive and big decisions, often quickly as events unfold. So what advice would you give lawyers, young and old, or anyone who's faced with making big decisions quickly?
Well, I was forced, okay? This question, so this was a practice trip to Berlin, 3 weeks. I worked with an agent there. He taught me some tricks and some skills that I wasn't taught while studying in the city of Jena. And he fed me some West German literature, and we just talked. And the next to last day in Berlin, he took me to Karlshorst, which was the headquarters of the Soviet Army in East Germany, also the headquarters for the KGB in East Germany. He took me to an office, and there was this short, totally unimpressive person sitting behind a big desk, and then he started talking. And immediately the unimpressive got crossed out because he had an extremely strong voice. He spoke only Russian. Half of it I understand, the other half had to be translated. And initially, 5 minutes propaganda, why we're fighting the good fight, and to hell with the Americans, they're evil, and blah blah blah. I didn't need to hear that. I was convinced anyway. And then he moved over to some, intelligence related subject, but nothing was like really, there was no real content that touched me until he asked the question, so are you in or not? And I wasn't prepared for that. Because up until that point, I had just like toyed with the idea. I says, well, that would be interesting, but well, let's see what happens. And that was like already a year and a half into my first contact. After my first contact with the KGB. And so I tried to stall. And that was a really ridiculous attempt to do that, because I said, well, I'm not trained. I need to learn a bunch of things, such as, and listen to this, such as driving a car, which is legitimate, and also typing on a typewriter. I don't know how I came up with that. Eventually, that became a very important skill for me, because I live fundamentally. The keyboard is almost like another internal organ of me. But anyway, and he looked at me like, then he said, hey, listen, don't worry about training. We'll train you, but we need people who are decisive and can make up their mind without much hesitation. So I give you until tomorrow noon. And just the question always comes up, could I have said no? Yes, without damage at that point, because you don't force somebody into this kind of an undertaking, because they will either defect or fail. So this, you had to be a volunteer. It was a sleepless night, and went back and forth and back and forth. And one thing about decision making, I found out over time that when I have alternatives and I write down the pros and the cons, and I even put numbers, weights on them, and then I add them up, and then one wins by a small margin, that doesn't really work. Eventually, you throw it away and you go with your gut. And your gut is really valuable, particularly as you get older, because of experience that you have. So a young person, a teenager, depending on the individual, they may have a really good gut also, but it has to be developed. It has to be developed, because over time you have made a lot of decisions, and what your track record is, and whether they're mostly good or not. If they're not good, you consult somebody else. Okay, you don't necessarily have to take their opinion, but consult somebody else. But if you're confident that you have a good track record, just make the damn decision. I when I was in corporate America, when I reached higher levels where I had the ability to make decisions that impact the entire enterprise, uh, spend uh, millions of dollars on software, I was never afraid to make a decision, because not making a decision is also a decision, because then the status quo prevails. And in my situation, the status quo was not acceptable. They always hired me to fix things. So I just went ahead and of course, having made decisions that could mean jail or no jail, or maybe even a threat to life, the corporate decisions came rather easy. But don't hesitate too long, because what you're doing is you're losing the window during which the decision actually could have an impact. Now, if you're driven by fear, you got to get rid of that fear first of all. And unfortunately, in our society, I see now this is a disease. The virus, the most dangerous virus that we're encountering these days is not COVID, it's fear. It's fear of everything. And if you're driven by fear, you will be totally ineffective and not achieve anything in life. And so it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. You're afraid of something, and eventually that something may happen to you.
Jack, there's a lot we could ask there, but it's got maybe one way link is to a passage in the book Deep Undercover, which is an excellent read, and where you write that it's the first time in a long time you failed at anything. Now, this is when you're trying to get the passport in the name of Henry Van Randel, and it comes back deceased.
Yeah, that was a big shock. That was one of the biggest shocks. The other big shock was when, after 9 years after resigning from the KGB, when the FBI said hello. That was a bigger shock. But the Henry Van Randel was like, this is where I allow myself to use the S word. Oh shit. I mean, this was the key. This was the one thing that I was in Canada for. Everything else was just, practice and figuring out how Canadians live. And that hit me hard, but and I actually felt guilty, even though it wasn't my fault at all. I did what I had to do. I got what I was supposed to get. The fact that it was tainted, nobody in the KGB knew, and certainly I didn't know.
So
But
I was going to ask you about that, Jack, because what you did, your response to that, so it's the first time you'd experienced failure in a long time. A lot of people would, we're all human, think, oh, you'd start feeling a bit down on yourself. You're talking there about fear and lack of resilience, etc. You decided to go out and have a discussion with someone in a bar and pass yourself off as American to prove to yourself that you could move through the world that way.
yeah, this is ambition, right? I actually should have left the country right away, because there was a good chance that somebody would investigate me, and they did. But, and I found that out, by the FBI shared that with me. They the Canadian Mounted Police were always a step behind me, so I decided I had to get out of Montreal. So I decided to go on to Windsor and Sarnia. These are English-speaking cities, and in Windsor, yeah, because I just needed to have something to take home with me to be proud of. So, mom and dad, I did well. So yeah, I was at a bar, and there was this American captain of a ship that would transport goods across the river back and forth. And I talked to him as if I was an American. I said about them, and their beer was better than ours and so forth. And there was no problem whatsoever. So I said, hey, I got it. That's just raw ambition, and risk taking to a point where it was actually dangerous. I should have left the country. And today, nobody can figure out why they knew my identity. They knew I had traveled with a German passport. They knew the airline that I came in on. Most likely that would be the airline I am leaving with also. Why they did not inform Swiss Air to say halt when I show up is beyond me. They should have caught me right then and there. So some of my survival wasn't really that I was that clever. I got also lucky. I was fearless to a point of occasional recklessness. This wasn't recklessness. I just thought, I had a task and I wasn't finished, and the task was more important to me than any concern about my safety. And you can argue this. That was not the way a good agent should have acted. But I shouldn't have defied the KGB when they wanted me back. Also, that was even worse than staying in Canada. So shoot me. I've always been the kind of person who doesn't run with a crowd. I always wanted to make my own decision, and so that's the wiring that we got from birth. You can't teach this, and you probably don't want to teach it, because if everybody acted like that, we would have the jails would be full.
It was striking too, Jack, to read that of your work at MetLife, that as much as there's no lone wolf, I imagine, as much quite like the undercover agent who's working behind the lines. But you said that you realized one day it occurred to you that you would really miss your work colleagues, your teammates, if and when you had to go back to Germany. So is it possible to derive as much satisfaction from working towards a collective goal, working in a team, as much as for yourself?
Oh yeah. I had spent 5 years in training for the KGB. Then I spent another 2+ years as a bike messenger, and another 3 years in college in the United States. I was a trained scientist. I was used to use my brain to be logical, do math, pretty high level math. Doesn't mean I was Nobel Prize material, absolutely not. And here I got a job where I was able to use my brain again and create something, write the program. This is the first time in the United States that I actually encountered programming languages. And when I first had to write a little test program, I said, oh my God, this is so good. And I fell in love with that kind of work. And I was surrounded by others who loved it just as much. And it was a great atmosphere. So we had all kinds of nationalities. We had a couple of Chinese guys, a Cuban who had emigrated from Cuba, an Italian, a Ukrainian, a couple of Russians. I mean, this was like the United Nations, and so there was no concern of me standing out as like not 100% American. I was just like part of the team, and I felt I could be myself. And this is the first time in over 10 years that I was part of a team. And as much of an individualist I am, I'm also a great team player. As a matter of fact, when I make the decision to sign up with the KGB, the toughest thing to separate myself from was my basketball team, because my family wasn't functional. My father had disappeared from us, and my mother had remarried, and we didn't have a strong emotional relationship. My team was my home, and so 10 years later, I found another home, and I knew I would miss them for sure. But that in and of itself wouldn't have made me defect. That, as you know, was my daughter Chelsea, who was stronger than all the other forces in the world that had an impact on me.